Good afternoon and welcome to our first ever launch of NCR Culture, a monthly video and podcast conversation on books, television, film, and a whole lot more. Every month, NCR staff members will interview writers, authors, poets, activists, directors, and more. I'm Christopher White, NCR's national correspondent, and today I'm the understudy. Our normal host, Olga Segura, had another obligation, but the real star here today is NCR's film critic, Sister Rose Pacatte, who's joining me and all of you for a conversation on some of the best films that have been released over the last year. And we're going to talk about their human and gospel values as well. So welcome to you, Sister Rose.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris. Thank you for having me to talk about movies. It's great. Thank you.
It's perfect timing. So,
exactly.
and just a reminder to all of you that this is an interactive conversation. So please be sure to go ahead and submit your own questions in the chat box, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. We're now on the eve of the Academy Awards, which will take place this Sunday, April 25th. And Sister Rose tells me she's seen over 30 of the Oscar-nominated films. So we've got a lot of ground to cover. But before we do, I want to first put the spotlight on Sister Rose to just hear first, how did you get into film?
Well, I guess I was always into film. I always loved movies. I went to my first movie in a theater when I was 6 years old and saw House on Haunted Hill with my brother, who was 5 years old. And my mother was not happy. My dad was home on leave. He and my other brother went to see the Ten Commandments. And then, movies influenced my decision to become a sister. And those two movies in particular were The Song of Bernadette and The Trouble with Angels. Folks, if you haven't seen those, you should see them. They really, they came at just the right time of when my discerning was going on. And then I entered the Daughters of St. Paul, and our mission, of course, is to use the media to communicate God's word. But I didn't really know much about that when I entered. But what I did know is that, for feast days and things like that, we had a movie, 16 millimeter movie library. So we watched movies. That was the big treat. And then, of course, when video came along, then it just became accessible all the time. But I did go to England for my degree in media studies and came back in '95. And things, Catholic communication groups and whatnot, moving to LA, helping to edit some books on scripture and film. I co-edited and co-wrote 5 books on scripture and film with Father Peter Malone from Australia. And so that was like a crash course. There was 75 to 80 films for each book, and that over 5 years. So, and then when I got to LA, I got invited to come to screenings and things like that, even though I was only blogging at the time. And then St. Anthony Messenger asked me to come on board as their reviewer almost 20 years ago. And then NCR in 2009. So now it's my job to go to movies and watch movies. So it's okay. It's good.
And we're very happy it's your job. So thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let's move on to the red carpet. Okay. What's going to win and what's going to win and what should win this year in your book for Best Picture?
Okay, I have a feeling that Nomad Land may win. It seems like it's the top. At least that's what everybody's talking about. I have no inside track to the Academy Awards, but my pick.
Do you have any money on anything?
No, not yet. I'm not home. If I was, there's some priests and nuns that we really get into this. So, but my pick for top film is The Sound of Metal. That is the film that I like the best, and it's as we were talking about this, preparing for this, we were talking about human and gospel values and I think this film I was just reflecting this morning, kindness, generosity. This is faith, hope, and charity. There's so much of that in this film. There's also about human dignity and, of course, growing as a human person in relationship with others. And then listening. It's about listening. Being able to be still with yourself, because this young man is going deaf because, of course, of playing the drums for so long, heavy metal music. But so that's this. I just think The Sound of Metal has so much to it without being any type of a preachy film. I found it. I was amazed by it because it touched on it was like a parallel to the spiritual life. And I love that about it.
Yeah, at your suggestion or prodding for my homework last night, I watched it as well, and it's a beautiful film, but it's I found it a hard film to watch because as he undergoes this hearing loss, the way it's filmed, you suffer through that with him, through what the viewer hears, and I think that's part of the point. They want you to experience some of what he's experiencing, and it's quite powerful.
Yeah, very, very powerful and a very worthy. I mean, this is a film I would watch again. This is the film I would use at a film retreat. This is, I don't know. So I heard some voices, from the internet and around that are saying this year's movie slate isn't that great. And I went, really, people? Did you really watch the movies? Because they actually mean something.
Yeah. Now, I want to move on to another film that's got some great buzz, and I haven't seen it, but it's Minari, which is about a Korean American family that moves to an Arkansas farm, sort of in search of the American dream. I'd love to hear your quick review on that.
Well, what's so interesting about, the director, Lee Isaac Chung, how he came up with this idea, because you don't think of Arkansas as an immigrant destination, to create the American dream. You think of the big cities, or something like that. But here, after 10 years in, I think, California, they come to Arkansas to have a farm and to grow Korean vegetables and things like that to sell to the market in Dallas. But it was such a beautiful, intimate look at a family, and how the wife is so disappointed, and they're living in a trailer, a double wide. They're not. It's not the home that she was looking for or expecting. And there's so many interesting characters in the film, especially the grandmother, and then there's this other character who's like this prophet who welcomes them, but he is the weirdest, freaky guy, but the most friendliest guy who welcomes them to their new place. I think that there's so much human dignity in this film, this and respect that grows between the family and the small community that they're with. It's about family. It's about hope and love. I think there's a lot of love in this film, and if this was to win, I would be very happy. I wouldn't mind at all.
I heard an interview with the writer about a month or two ago, and he said in some way, pretty much all of his characters are inspired by Flannery O'Connor. And I'm curious if you detected that.
Well, not right off the bat, but after somebody mentioned this to me, I went back, and the first story that came to mind was A Displaced Person, because her short story, this is all about displaced people. And in one review that I read, when he was talking about this term of displacement, it's also the husband and wife are kind of displaced from each other. The grandmother is displaced, but then they create a place to be together. And then the other one, Will Patton plays Paul, is a good man is hard to find. And you remember at the end of that story what happens to the grandmother, but she has this realization that this bad man who's going to harm her terribly was somebody else's son, and that someone loved him. And there's this awakening of love in this grandmother. And so that's what I thought. The grandmother probably worked well with that parallel, not with what happens, but with who the person is. So between Paul could have been Tarwater from The Violent Bear It Away, because this is this odd prophet type of character, prophet preacher type of character. So they're not exact correlations, but I would agree with Chung, and I think with some more study, I think I could find some more parallels there.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Nomad Mandela at the outset, which is, this story of a woman in her 60s who's, lost, so much of, her economic security after the Great Recession. And so she lives in a van as she goes through the American West and does a lot of sort of temporary jobs, including at an Amazon factory. And it's got a lot of buzz, as you mentioned. We had a review about 2 weeks ago from the Jesuit Jim McDermott at NCR. Would love to hear your quick thoughts on that. And, why do you think it's sort of a slow moving film? Why do you think that has attracted such buzz this year?
I think because there are people who are actually living like this, first of all, that some of them by choice, but some of them because they have no other options. And they're older people, mostly. And so what does that say about how our culture is letting our older citizens fall out? They don't really have a home. They have this loose vagabond community, but they're not connected. There's a disconnection going on. And the more I thought about this, to me, it was hard to find, like, human dignity was more offended than it was upheld in this film. I mean, in some places it is, but if you think that these are at the margins of society today, well, their dignity is being offended more than upheld. And that was one thing that really that got to me. There are themes of loneliness, and it's kind of a waiting for death. That's what it made me think of. And so there's a darkness and a heaviness to this film. And Frances McDormand, I've never seen her off. She is a great actress, and she carries this wonderful character. She really brings it out. And I want to say something about the director, Chloe Zhao. She's amazing. Her first film that I saw, and I think it was her first feature, was last year, The Rider, about a rodeo rider who has to make a big decision about his life. And I can't, it's hard for me. She didn't even grow up in this country. And yet she has this connection to American sensibilities, especially these inner sensibilities. And I just think she's amazing. And if she won for Best Director, I would be very thrilled about that. I think she's very worthy. But the film itself is, these nomads, it's fluid and transient. And what I feel, the loneliness is what I feel the most.
Mm. One of the things I thought about when I saw it is, Pope Francis's Share the Journey campaign that was rolled out at the Vatican about migrants and refugees and displaced persons. And, obviously the circumstances are quite different here, but she is in many ways displaced. And for 2 hours, you really do share in her journey. And it's a beautiful meditation, I think. So. Just briefly, I also want to talk about the film, the Trial of the Chicago 7, which is, of course, based on the infamous 1969 trial of 7 defendants that had been charged by the government with conspiracy and other things from the protests in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention. And in particular, I want to talk about Sacha Baron Cohen's performance as Abby Hoffman, which is just a real standout performance in my book.
Oh. Well, this is Aaron Sorkin at his courtroom best, and the dialogue is crisp and fast and smart, and these actors are wonderful. But Sacha Baron Cohen, who is not usually at the top of my list of favorite actors, because I did see that subsequent movie, and some things you can never take out of your mind after you see them. But as Abby Hoffman, I just graduated from high school when this all happened in Chicago. So I remember it, but I didn't know a whole lot about it, but I remember it all happening. But Sacha Baron Cohen inhabits the character of Abby Cohen. And if you watch his face, you see the burden that he's carrying for this terrible, illegal, unnecessary war in Vietnam. And you see that he feels it, that he knows it. It's like he was born an old soul. And even though he was still rather young here, he's already grasped what the consequences are of injustice, of disrespect for peoples, of this theme of even what it's doing to the common good, where they're trying to uphold the common good. they're being pressed down, and their views go on trial rather than anything wrong that they did. And if there's one thing in the film that really stood out to me, it's when they go back and forth with the judge and say, you know, we haven't done anything. You put our ideology on trial rather than, and that's not American. We haven't done it. We haven't committed any crimes. And I think that's an outstanding point to make. And you know, Aaron Sorkin, even on The West Wing, he's always teaching us. Did you ever notice that? He's always teaching us. So this is what you would call edutainment, I guess. Education and entertainment put together. But I didn't mind. It was well done. And this is a contender. It's a really big contender. And I hope Sacha Baron Cohen wins as Best Supporting Actor. And he will take that as a redeeming award that will help him choose even better roles in the future.
I love that you're finding redemption in this for him. So.
Yeah, but deserving, absolutely deserving. When I saw it, I went, this is an Oscar performance. Mm-hmm.
Before we move on to a different Oscar category, let's briefly chat about Promising Young Woman, which is sort of chronicling the story of this woman who's lost her best friend and in medical school together, and then she drops out and her life is sort of spiraling. And basically her friend was raped and the school turned a blind eye, and she sets out for revenge. Would love to, it's a controversial film in some circles, but would welcome any thoughts you have on that.
Sure. Well, you know, I'm of two minds on this film. I mean, on the one hand, you have the Me Too movement and Time's Up movement that I think need to be re-energized. But so you've got that aspect of it, because the school did nothing for this young woman, and she ultimately took her own life, which is what really has set her friend on this journey of revenge. So that's the other part of it. Does revenge ever do anything? And it ends up so tragically. I didn't expect that ending. I'm glad I hadn't read anything about it first, but it's shocking. But so is the situation shocking when schools or the military or corporate America doesn't take women seriously, and even men sometimes. So there's that aspect to it, that it makes a contribution socially, perhaps, but what else could she have done? What would have been a better way for her to work through this? Certainly she didn't have a good relationship with her parents. She's 30 years old now. They just want her out of the house, but they're not seeing what's really troubling her. So that it's a very complex movie, and be sure you're in a good place when you watch it, because it's hard to watch.
It is. That being said, I have to say Carey Mulligan gives a remarkable performance, and I want to see her win for it, because she is just mesmerizing. So, you know,
and she's got her whole history in cinema has been mesmerizing. She's wonderful. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's move on to another category, one that I think is also just attracting a lot of attention, and that's, you know, Best Documentary. A number of great films on this list. Let's start with the Mole Agent, which is, you know, this octogenarian who poses as a resident in a Chilean nursing home to see if he can uncover signs of abuse. And, you know, again, this is, you know, a documentary, so real life. So I haven't seen this yet. I'm really excited to see it. Would love to hear your quick review of it.
Well, it's tagged as a documentary, but yet what you're watching, you go, is it really a documentary or is this a setup? But this 83-year-old man who answers an ad, he has to not have any family obligations, and he has to know something about technology, but he doesn't really. So they have to teach him how to do FaceTime. They give him a pen with a video camera in it because he's searching for any abuse. This woman has complained that her mother is not being taken care of. And this Catholic nursing home, not nursing home, residential care, I guess you would call it. But I just love this man. And in the end, everybody in the nursing home, I don't want to say nursing home because it is partially, but the residents, they all fall in love with him. And I wanted to canonize him by the end because he doesn't just brush people off. He takes time. He talks with people. 2 women want to marry him, and they are in their 80s. So hope lives forever, right? But hope lives on. But this is probably one of the most charming films I have seen in a long time. And of course, it calls again, this theme of loneliness. Our older people whose children never go to see them. Do you know how many there are? And this is in Chile, and it's the same here. So these are, again, people at the margins. But there is such a loving charm to this film that I just think it's a winner. It's a winner. But there's a really competition in this field, though.
Well, yeah. Pope Francis has, declared this, first ever World Day for elderly and grandparents in July. So maybe he'll host a screening of this at the Vatican.
Actually, because it's a Catholic home, so he should. Yeah. And actually, it comes off pretty good. So just so you know, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to our listeners, we're going to get to your questions very soon, but please submit them if you have questions. Before we get there, a few more documentaries to get through. Let's talk about My Octopus Teacher. So it's beautifully shot. It's this, exhausted filmmaker who takes a year off of work to go diving basically every day in his native South Africa and befriends an octopus.
Which is astounding. And he visits this octopus after he first discovers it. He visits it every day for a year or almost a year. And I have to tell you that he's in a midlife crisis, and that's why he goes home to his native place. But what he learns, and I did take note when I was watching the film, the good thing about watching films at home is that you can stop them and go back, and you can, did I hear right? So I did write down, well, what can an octopus teach anybody? And he said, he teaches me to become sensitized to the other, especially wild creatures. And on this World Day, right?
Happy Earth Day, exactly.
Yeah, Earth Day, right. So how hours of time with nature teaches gentleness, how especially vulnerable these creatures are, and how vulnerable all of life is. So this movie is just a thing of beauty. And certainly of care for the earth. And so, go ahead.
Well, I have to ask you a personal question.
Sure.
Will you ever eat an octopus again?
I have eaten octopus under convent pressure in the old days, but I think I'll let it go in the future. Yeah. And especially after seeing how sweet they are. I mean, this animal, I don't know, it's an amazing relationship that they build up that heals him.
I've had a number of friends say never again after this film. So
yeah.
Let's talk about Collective, which is this documentary set in Romania, in Bucharest, after a nightclub fire, and these journalists go undercover to sort of look at the healthcare industry and the fraud. And a lot of speculation this may win Best Documentary.
This is a deeply disturbing film, and it's a little bit like the Boston Globe Spotlight. They go after this because so many of these people who were burned, who should have been sent out of the country, which is the policy of Romania, to Austria and other countries, because they don't have good medical facilities. And instead, they were just left in these hospitals, and they died from bacterial infections. What they found out was that the disinfectant, the companies who actually make it, dilute it even before it gets shipped out. So they make more of it, they make more money on it. Then it gets to the hospitals, and the hospitals dilute it so they don't have to use so much of it, which caused this outbreak of this bacteria that was really criminal, and how much the government and corporations and kickbacks are all tied into this. And the real hero of this story, of course, is journalism, is the press. And I think, when we see the freedom of the press is being depressed in so many countries, that this should win would also be a good thing, because journalism changes things, because when it tells the truth, it changes things. Authentic journalism should be rewarded. And in this case, it's not like we haven't seen things like, maybe not exactly the same thing happen in our own country, just for the sake of profit. But this was a scandal, and it was criminal.
A few months ago, I interviewed Marty Barron, who was retiring, but he led the Spotlight Team investigation. And he said that film just did such good for journalism as an industry.
Yes.
So maybe we'll see that again here. So
yes,
we're getting close to time, but I want to cover a few more questions. We've got to talk about Soul, because it's so it's so spiritual. It's nominated, of course, for Best Animated Feature Film, and I have not seen it yet, but I've read so much about it, so I'd love to hear your take on it.
Well, I did an extensive review for the National Catholic Reporter, and maybe we can put up the link to that.
Absolutely.
But when I got to interview Peter Docter, who was the director and the producer, I interviewed her as well. But, he mentioned that, I was making this film and I came across this book, The Jesuit Guide to Just About Everything. And I said, what? He said, yes. And he said, if you'll notice in the film, we try to make, we want to make the audience notice God. And so the characters notice God and creation and all these good things, and that life is worth living. So, and then afterwards, Pete and Jim Martin did a blog out of Fordham University. I'm not sure how that was set up, but it's around out there if you want to find it. It's a great hour-long conversation with them. But, this to me was a movie where any person of any religion can find something, because they put everything in there. But it's also where I, as a Catholic, can find something, especially on the meaning of life, on heaven, about heaven and everlasting life. And then anybody could find that. And even maybe an agnostic or an atheist would watch this and find, yes, it is worth being a person, a human being on this earth. It is worth living for whatever time that we are gifted with. So I find this a very grace-filled movie. And beautiful.
One of the questions that has come in from our audience is, what are some of the best Oscar films for kids to watch? And certainly Soul would be on that list. But what else, would you say, shortlist for that?
Well, I really liked Mulan. That was, I liked it. I know there was a lot of controversy going on about where it was filmed and everything, but in China, because of the human rights violations, which are very real. And I don't know how you step away from that to look at the film, but if you look at the film just as it is, I think it's beautiful. It's about family. It's about self-sacrifice. I found it a very beautiful film, and a little, how they always put some humor in it too. So there's something for kids always. There's always somebody farting or something. That's the kid level.
Who doesn't want to hear that music again?
Yeah, exactly. But that's what they do, so that they're reaching, multiple levels of the audience there, right? Yeah. So those are two. I haven't seen many. Over the Moon. That is another movie, interesting, about a Chinese girl. It happens, it's been a while since I've seen it, but it either happens at the Chinese New Year, I think, and it's about these mooncakes. Anyway, it's a lovely, beautiful film, and I think that's on Netflix. So it's really good.
For our final question, we've got a question here. Are there any films that didn't get noticed by the Oscar nominators that should have been?
Oh, I was just thinking of this the other night. Can you ask me another one,
sure.
One, and I'll think about. I'm trying to think of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom didn't make it to the top, did it? I'm not.
I don't. Is it one of the 8? I'm not sure. So.
No, it did not make a best film. That should have made a best film nomination. Absolutely, and if you took the time to watch it, and of course Chadwick Boseman, I mean, such sadness there that was the last film he made, and Viola Davis, but it wasn't just that. It's about the Black experience. It's about how record companies, even back then, treated people. I think there's a lot going on there, and so I would have liked to have seen that nominated for a Best Picture, definitely.
Well, just a reminder to our listeners that this Sunday, the Academy Awards take place. Sister Rose, thank you so much for joining me today for our inaugural episode of NCR Culture. We're so grateful to have your reviews and for you to be a part of NCR. And thank you all for joining and being such regular readers and listeners. Please come back next month for the return of NCR Culture.
Thank you. God bless you all.